Ladies and gentlemen, K Kim here. Welcome to the daily update. Market is up today. You can see about 1% today, 0.92 to be exact. Market was up more than that. It was as high as 289 today. It tagged 289 here. It was up close to 2%. It faded towards the end of the day, and we're back where it gapped up. The area where the gap came back to retest that gap area. And so just to follow up from last night's daily update, we talked about this level right here. I actually tweeted this out earlier this afternoon or midday or something like that when the market was soaring. And you can see here, and this is nothing new. We talked about this yesterday, didn't we? We talked about how bears want to, if the bulls gap it up, right? If the bulls gap it up and continue to run higher, it will be better for the bears. And I'm just reiterating what I talked about last night. It would have been better for the bears have at least portion of that down gap. And some of you think that there's no gap here. There is a gap. If you go to a minute chart, you'll know it because that's where it closed. And then that's where it opened next day. So the gap started from here. So there's a gap from here to here. So there's still a gap remaining. So what we talked about yesterday was bears want to see at least portion of this gap remains open and then fall back down if they want to create potentially a lower high and lower low. You guys remember that? So the gap area here, let's go back. Let's go back to this chart right here. So let's do a little bit of maintenance on our chart. There's a few things happening here. There's one thing that bears did right is the fact that they defended at least a portion of that gap. Make sure bulls don't go all the way up and filling that gap. Another thing bears did it right was they didn't let the bulls hang around here. Because if, let's say, this is where it closed. You know what, I'm gonna talk about it. Let's say this is right now. Like this is where it closed. There's a huge threat that bulls could have gapped it back up tomorrow morning above 290, and then this entire thing could have been an island bottom. By bringing it down, you know, obviously bulls could still gap it up, but it will be hard to gap it up above 290.50, right? So that's what bears have done, and which is a good thing, right? Bulls brought it up, a lot of momentum, right? Sentiment was bullish in the micro term, came and filled this gap, brought it back down, make sure not the gap, it doesn't get filled entirely or entirety of the gap. The problem with that though is that there's no longer a island top reversal, because what bulls have done is that bulls came up here, filled that gap, but that's where that island reversal came about. Because again, remember that's see, the gap started from here. That's where it closed. That's where it opened next day, right? So that was a gap, down gap here. There's that up gap, and this was a down gap, right? Well, bulls have closed that gap. So there's no longer a island gap, right? Because there's no gap down here. I mean, the gap started here. You guys understand what I'm talking about? There's no island gap anymore. So we're gonna get that out. So that's what bulls have done, is they killed that island reversal gap selling pressure. And I'm gonna take this out, this box, because that box represented that's a potentially an island. Well, that was a island and now no longer an island because, well, bulls got up there and filled it. So now we have a normal gap that remains. So we also want to give same here. So we have a gap here from this morning, right? And you can see So same logic applies, right? Same logic applies where bulls got up, came to that prior support, also coinciding with what? The gap area. The same logic applies, and that's why there was actually at one point there was a much more dip buying activity occurred. I think it was up as much as like 287, pull back a little bit, and there's no mistake why we end the day right here, because that's the same logic. That's where prior resistance was, because we gapped down, we hang around there a little bit, so we had the intraday swing high, right? Intraday swing high. And that's coinciding with the gap area. So obviously that's going to provide as support, right? So let's zoom up a little bit. Just zoom out a little bit. And I actually want to stop here and let's look at more of a midterm as we analyze short-term sentiment of things. We have a very, very interesting sequence here, and we've been talking about this last couple times, is that we gapped up here, and then we fell and gapped down. And then we gapped up, and then we fell and retested 30 EMA, right? Okay, look. We have exact same, almost identical here. We gapped up here. It fell. We gapped down here, continued sideways, and then we gapped up, which is same as here, continued higher. I mean, this tech took 2 days to happen, but this all happened in 1 day. But same exact sequence where we gapped up, continued higher, pull back, and retest the gap area, right? Continued pull back, retest the gap area near that rising 30 EMA. So you can see on the last video we talked about how this 30 EMA was what? Falling. As of today, this 30 EMA is what? Is rising. And we're right at that level. That 30 EMA does have, strong present. At least when the bears come down, when the sellers bring it down, ever since early April, and retest that level, it acted as support every time. Only time that level didn't act as support was when bears just gap it down. It's almost like bears know that this level has been provided as strong support every time. When that 30 EMA was hanging around, if the bears let bulls hang around above it, it seems that every single time bulls bring it up. So there are few incidents where bears just like, let's not even deal with that moving average. Let's just gap it down, right? That was the only time where bears are able to bypass that 30 EMA, right? And actually we're hanging around here. So the best bet for the bears is to gap it down one more time. Gap it down one more time and trying to come retest some of these support levels. We got that longer term moving average also, right? We talked about that, and that long-term moving average, does have a pretty impressive resume, right? It was in that vicinity. It's kind of start to move sideways a little bit, but kind of rising too, right? And at the same time, we still have higher lows and higher highs. We've been talking about that also. And we want to continue to give benefit of the doubt to the buyers, because the longer term trend is bullish, right? And so if the bears bring it down, fill the gap, that's not going to be enough, because if the gap gets filled, it's going to act as support, pretty strong support at that, because we got that moving average there. Also, I've actually made a little bit of adjustment on our rising pivot. I made it into a fan line. This is what you call fan line. We got that rising pivot, and then we got that fan line going. Do you see that? So first, it started as a rising pivot. It was a prior resistance, and then became a new support. And then from that level, we got, you see that the angle starting to rise here. So now that that's what they call a fan line in technical term. So we got that fan line going. And so now we have a lot of supports that bears have to go through. We got the gap area here. We're hanging around it. First, obviously bears have to deal with that 30 EMA, knowing that 30 EMA did act as pretty strong support. That would be the first thing you want to look at first thing tomorrow morning, if we hang around above that area, if we see any kind of gap up tomorrow or something like that, right, from the buyers going to want to come up here and fill that gap quickly. So bears want to bring it down. Best way is gapping it down, not dealing with that 30 EMA. If bears come down, feel it, that's going to act as support also. And also you can see that we have that rising support now. 3 touches, 1, 2, 3, right? You know what? Let's see if we can make a channel into it. Yeah, okay. I don't know if that's gonna hit. I don't think it's gonna hit here because of this thing. So let's just kind of do that. So we have rising channels. Let's kind of let's keep that in there. So we'll track as the price potentially get back up there sometime, right? One last look here, or one last thing we're gonna talk about before I let you go, is that that oscillator, right? So we've been talking about that oscillator. Every time when that oscillator came off of the oversold status, we did see a bounce, and that rallied all the way up. The thing about it is that we actually didn't gap back up all the way up here. So you can see that's all the way up here, and that was all the way up, and that was all the way up. We're still kind of not that level yet. So at this point, we're not quite at that overbought, but we're getting there. There's lots of momentum there. So sometimes when you see a lot of bullish momentum, it could have some up and down movement like that as the oscillators comes back down to reset. So we bounced off of that. So overall, I think, this bullish move, this bullish jump was a very constructive for the buyers to continue in that, longer term momentum to continue. And I think the next thing we're going to look out for is that are the bears going to able to gap it down and then kill that up move, that buying pressure they came this afternoon or this morning, Or are we going to see that 50 MA acting as support like it did in the past? So we'll follow up tomorrow night, and we'll go from there, right? You guys have a wonderful evening, and good luck trading tomorrow.